Stop listening to that voice for 1 second. The one that just told you that you're behind, that you're a fraud, that everyone else figured out how to build a life, a career, a body, a bank account, and somehow you're still standing in the wreckage of your own potential, wondering what's wrong with you. Maybe it hit you at 6 a.m., staring at the ceiling before your alarm even went off, already running through everything you didn't get done yesterday. Maybe it hit you in a meeting, the second after you said something and immediately replayed it, certain it landed wrong. Maybe it hit you in the car, in that strange quiet space between one obligation and the next, where there's nothing left to distract you from whatever's been building all day. Maybe it's hitting you right now, a low hum underneath everything, telling you that even watching this video is just another form of procrastination, another thing you're doing instead of fixing yourself. I need you to hear this clearly. That voice is not telling you the truth. That voice is a chemical. Right now, as you sit there replaying every mistake from the last week, your body is flooding itself with a corrosive stress hormone that is actively shutting down the part of your brain responsible for confidence, clarity, and rational thought. You are not having a bad thought. You are having a bad chemical event, and you can't think your way out of a chemical event. You can only flush it. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the exact 4-minute protocol that pulls that hormone out of your bloodstream, shuts the voice down at its biological root, and hands your brain back to you. Stay with me until the end, because there's a part coming up that almost nobody teaches, and it's the part that actually works. Before we go further, I want to ground this in something I believe at the center of my bones, and the center of everything I teach. We take the breath so we can grow the life. That's not a slogan, that's biology. Every single shift I'm about to walk you through, the silencing of that internal voice, the rewiring of your nervous system, the rebuilding of your confidence, starts with a single physical act before it ever becomes a mental one. You don't think your way into peace, you breathe your way into it, and from that breath, everything else grows. I'm Dr. Silas Kincaid, and for the better part of 2 decades, I've worked with high performers, executives, founders, surgeons, athletes, who all came to me with some version of the same complaint. I know what I should be doing, I just can't get my own mind to cooperate. What I discovered again and again is that the mind isn't the problem. The body is running the show, and once you understand that, everything changes. Here's what I need you to remember before anything else. If you only take one thing from this entire video, let it be the sequence I'm going to walk you through in a few minutes. But you need the next few minutes first, because they're the reason that sequence actually works instead of just feeling nice for 5 minutes and wearing off by lunch. Let's start where you actually live, inside your own head, at 2 in the morning, replaying a sentence you said in a meeting 3 days ago, certain that everyone noticed, certain that it confirmed what you already suspected about yourself. That voice doesn't announce itself as a chemical. It shows up dressed as truth. It sounds like your own reasoning, your own judgment, your own honest self-assessment. It says things like, "You're not cut out for this. You're going to be found out eventually. Everyone else has it figured out." And because it sounds like you trust it. You give it a vote. You let it sit at the head of the table and make decisions about your worth, your next move, your future. Here's what I need you to understand. This is not a personality trait. This is not just how you're wired. This is not evidence of some deep, permanent flaw that therapy alone is going to slowly chip away at over the next decade. What's actually happening is far more mechanical and far more fixable than you've been led to believe. That internal monologue is keeping your entire system locked in a state of high alert. Every time it fires, your heart rate climbs slightly. Your muscles tighten almost imperceptibly. Your attention narrows. You stop being able to see the bigger picture of your career, your relationships, your goals, because your body has decided on a primitive level that you are under threat, and survival is the only priority. You are not failing at confidence. You are succeeding perfectly at a threat response that was never designed for modern life. So I want you to do something right now. Stop treating that voice as a personality trait you have to manage with willpower and affirmations taped to your bathroom mirror. Start treating it for what it actually is, a physiological event happening to your body, not a verdict handed down by your soul. The moment you make that shift from "this is who I am" to "this is what's happening in me," you open the door to an actual solution. A physical one, not another mindset hack, an intervention that works on the same level the problem exists on. Think about how much of your life you've already spent arguing with this voice. You've tried logic, listing your accomplishments, reminding yourself with every reason it's wrong. Maybe that works for 30 seconds before the voice finds a new angle. That's because you've been fighting a chemical event with a debate strategy. You can't out-argue a hormone. It doesn't care how compelling your evidence is. It keeps firing as long as the underlying chemistry stays elevated, no matter how many times you tell it to stop. That's also why this voice tends to show up hardest right at the exact moments you can least afford it. Right before a presentation, in the middle of a hard conversation, the night before a decision that actually matters. That's not bad luck. Those are precisely the moments your body is already primed for a stress response, so the chemical floor is already higher, and the voice has more fuel to work with. It's worth naming a pattern many of you will recognize. The voice often goes quiet during the actual demanding event and gets loudest in the gaps around it, the hour before, the hour after, the night in between. That's because during the event itself, your attention is fully occupied by the task in front of you, leaving less bandwidth for the internal monologue. The moment that demand lifts, your brain has room again, and a nervous system still flooded with cortisol fills that room with exactly the kind of replaying and rehearsing that feels like productive preparation, but is really just unresolved activation with nowhere else to go. Recognizing that pattern matters because it tells you the problem was never really about the event. It was about what your body was still carrying before and after it. I want you to tell me about a client I worked with a few years ago. She was a surgeon, somebody whose hands were steady enough to hold someone's life in every single day. And yet the night before any major case, she would lie awake convinced she was the one who finally messed up. Not because she lacked skill. Her outcomes were excellent. But the night before, her body didn't care about her track record. It only cared that tomorrow carried risk, and risk, to a nervous system stuck in overdrive, reads exactly the same whether you're facing a wild animal or an operating room. She told me she used to spend that pre-surgery anxiety trying to reason with herself, listing her credentials in her head like a defense attorney. It never worked for more than a few minutes. What changed everything for her wasn't a better argument. It was learning that the voice she was arguing with wasn't an argument at all. It was a hormone with a microphone. So what is it exactly? Here's the mechanism in plain terms, because you deserve to actually understand your own machinery instead of just being told to calm down. That critical voice is, in large part, a downstream symptom of a cortisol spike. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone, useful in small bursts, genuinely damaging in the kind of chronic, low-grade flood most people are walking around with today. When cortisol rises sharply, it directly impairs your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought, perspective, and long-term decision-making. At the same time, it heightens your amygdala, the threat detection center constantly scanning for danger. The part of your brain that could talk you down gets quieter. The part screaming something is wrong gets louder. That combination is the architecture of the inner critic. It isn't a coincidence. It's chemistry, expressing itself as a sentence in your head. There's another layer to this that almost nobody talks about, and it has to do with how your brain decides what counts as a threat in the first place. Your amygdala doesn't actually distinguish very well between a physical danger and a social one. As far as your ancient threat detection system is concerned, the risk of being embarrassed in front of colleagues, the risk of missing a deadline, the risk of a relationship feeling distant, these register on roughly the same circuitry that would have once fired for a genuine physical predator. Your body doesn't have a separate, calmer alarm system reserved for modern problems. It's running the exact same hardware your ancestors used to survive actual life or death encounters, except now that hardware gets triggered by an unanswered email. That mismatch between the size of the modern stressor and the size of the biological response it provokes is precisely why so many capable, accomplished people feel like they're constantly overreacting internally to things that, on paper, shouldn't matter this much. You're not overreacting. Your hardware is simply outdated for the environment you're running it in.
And here's why this is hitting you constantly. The landscape you're operating in right now, saturated with algorithmic performance metrics, AI tools making everyone's output instantly comparable, a culture of constant visible achievement, has put your nervous system into something close to permanent low-grade survival mode. Your ancestors' bodies were built to face a threat, resolve it, return to baseline. Yours rarely gets that resolution. The threats never fully go away, so the cortisol never fully clears. It builds. Your inner critic isn't getting louder because you're getting weaker. It's getting louder because the chemical floor you're standing on keeps rising. This is also why two people can go through the exact same stressful event and come out with wildly different levels of internal noise afterward. It's rarely about who's more resilient as a personality trait. More often, it's about whose baseline cortisol was already lower walking in. Someone who's been running a daily floor of low stress has room to absorb a hard week without tipping into a full spiral. Someone who's already near the ceiling gets pushed over by something relatively small and then wonders why they're overreacting to what looks from the outside like a minor setback. It isn't a character difference, it's a starting point difference, and starting points are exactly the kind of thing you can actually change. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. You've heard some version of "it's just stress hormones" before, maybe from another video, maybe from a book, and it didn't change anything for you. So let me be specific about why this time is different. Most of what gets taught about stress stays at the level of awareness. Notice your stress, name your stress, journal about your stress. Awareness is useful, but awareness alone doesn't move a single molecule of cortisol out of your bloodstream. You can be fully aware that you're anxious and still be anxious 5 hours later. What actually clears cortisol is specific physiological action, the kind your body recognizes as a genuine signal of safety, not a cognitive acknowledgement of a problem. That distinction is the entire reason most people stay stuck. They keep treating a body-level problem with a thought-level tool. So, lock this in. You do not have a mindset problem. You have a hormonal buildup, and a hormonal buildup is not solved by thinking harder or journaling more while the chemistry underneath stays completely untouched. You cannot outthink a hormone. You can only move it out of your system, through the body, not through cognitive effort. That's the part nobody gave you. Everyone hands you the diagnosis, manage your stress, and walks away before giving you the mechanism for actually flushing the chemical causing it. I'm not doing that to you. Here's the mechanism. The goal of the next 4 minutes isn't to think positive thoughts. It's to give your body undeniable physical evidence that you're safe, so it can shift out of fight or flight and back into rest and digest, the state where your prefrontal cortex comes back online and that critical voice loses its fuel source. Sit or stand with your feet flat on the ground, palms resting loosely on your thighs. Begin gently tapping your hands, alternating left knee, left, right, at a slow, steady rhythm, roughly 1 tap per second. This alternating movement engages both hemispheres of your brain at once, which research on bilateral stimulation shows can interrupt the spiraling repetitive nature of an anxious or self-critical thought stream. You're not trying to silence the thought by force. You're giving your nervous system a competing signal. We are doing something rhythmic and safe right now. If your mind keeps pulling you back to whatever triggered the spike in the first place, that's completely normal. You're not doing it wrong. The tapping isn't meant to instantly erase the thought. It's meant to give your nervous system a second channel to pay attention to, so the thought has to share space instead of occupying the whole room. Keep the rhythm steady even if your mind wanders. The body doesn't need your full mental focus to start shifting. It just needs the repetition. After about a minute of that, shift your breath. In through your nose for a count of 4, hold for 2, out through your mouth for a count of 8. The exhale needs to be longer than the inhale. That's the part most people get backward. A longer exhale directly stimulates your vagus nerve, the primary line of communication telling your body to stand down from alert status. Run that for about a minute. You'll likely feel your shoulders drop on their own by the 3rd or 4th cycle.
Some of you are going to find the first cycle or two genuinely difficult. Your breath might feel shaky on the exhale, or you might run out of air before you reach 8. That's not failure. That's your body showing you in real time just how activated it actually was. Push gently toward 8 without straining and let the count get easier each cycle. By the 4th or 5th round, most people find the exhale starts to feel almost involuntary, like the body has remembered how to do this on its own.
Then stand up if you can and discharge it physically. Shake out your hands vigorously for 10 seconds like you're flicking water off your fingertips. Roll your shoulders back 5 times, slow and full. This isn't symbolic. Cortisol and adrenaline were built by your biology to be metabolized through movement, historically by running or fighting. You're giving your body a small, safe version of that release, so the hormone has somewhere to go besides circulating endlessly through your bloodstream. Finally, say something out loud, not in your head, out loud. This is a chemical, not a verdict. I am safe right now. Say it twice. Speaking it engages a different neural pathway than simply thinking it. It requires motor planning, breath control, auditory feedback, all of which tell your nervous system this is a deliberate, conscious override, not just another passing thought. That's the entire sequence. 4 minutes. No equipment, no app, no supplement. Just your own body used correctly. Remember what I told you at the very start of this video. You can't think your way out of a chemical event. You can only flush it. That's exactly what you just did. I want to tell you what this actually feels like, because the change is rarely dramatic in the moment. Most people don't experience some sudden wave of euphoria at the end of minute 4. What they describe instead is something quieter, a kind of internal volume knob, the intern noun. The thought might still be there in some form, but it stops feeling urgent. It stops feeling like the most important fact in the room. That shift from urgent to background is the entire goal. You're not trying to erase the thought permanently in one round. You're trying to prove to your nervous system that you can interrupt it, which is a skill that compounds every time you use it. But I want to be honest with you about something. This is not a permanent fix on its own. This is the immediate reset. What you do with the clarity you get back in those 4 minutes is what determines whether this becomes a one-time relief or the first domino in a complete shift in how your nervous system operates day to day. Here's where this stops being a trick you pull out in a crisis and starts becoming a permanent recalibration of how your brain handles that voice altogether. The first shift is linguistic, and it sounds small, but it isn't. The next time that voice fires, you're not good enough, you're behind, they can all see through you. Stop calling it my thoughts. Call it specifically high cortisol. Not metaphorically, literally. In your head, that's high cortisol talking. This single act of relabeling creates immediate distance between you and the voice. You stop being the thing that's broken and start being the observer of a chemical event passing through you. That's the difference between drowning in a thought and watching one float by. I want you to notice something about how that surgeon I mentioned earlier described her own shift. She told me the turning point wasn't the night the protocol worked perfectly. It was a few weeks later, lying awake again, when she caught herself starting to spiral and almost on instinct thought, "Oh, that's just high cortisol," before she'd even consciously decided to use the label. That's what repetition builds, not perfection, reflex. The second shift happens through repetition. Every time you run that 4-minute reset instead of spiraling into the old pattern, you're not just calming yourself down in the moment, you're physically weakening the neural pathway connecting stress to self-attack. Your brain runs on a use it or lose it basis. The pathway that says stress equals self-criticism has likely been reinforced thousands of times in your life, which is why it fires so fast and feels so automatic. But every time you interrupt it with the reset, instead of following it down its usual road, you weaken that connection and strengthen a new one. Stress equals reset, not attack. Do this consistently, and what currently feels like an instant, unstoppable inner monologue starts to feel more like a flicker, present, but no longer in charge. It helps to think of it the same way you'd think about physical training. Nobody expects to walk into a gym once and walk out with visibly different muscles. You'd expect soreness, inconsistency, maybe even a session where you felt weaker than the one before it, and you would understand that as part of the process rather than evidence it wasn't working. Your nervous system responds to the same logic. The first few times you run this sequence, the relief might feel modest, or it might fade faster than you'd like. That's not the protocol failing. That's the early, unglamorous stage of a pathway being rebuilt, the part that happens before you can feel the difference, the same way the first weeks in a gym happened before you can see one. I want to address something directly, because I know it'll be in some of your heads. Maybe you've tried breathing exercises before. Maybe you've tried tapping or grounding or some version of this, and it didn't stick. Here's what I've found almost without exception in the people I've worked with. It wasn't that the technique failed. It was that it was used exactly once during the worst possible moment, expecting it to undo years of reinforced patterning in a single try. A pathway that's been carved thousands of times doesn't get replaced after one rep. It gets replaced after dozens, sometimes hundreds of small, consistent interruptions. The people who see this actually change their baseline aren't the ones who do it perfectly once. They're the ones who do it imperfectly, repeatedly, without giving up after the third time it didn't feel like a miracle. This is genuinely difficult to do alone, with no structure and no accountability, which is exactly why I built something for people who are serious about this shift. I call it the Self-Regulation Toolkit. It's the complete system I use with the high performance I work with directly, a full audio-guided protocol you can run in real time, an early warning tracker to catch a cortisol spike before the voice even starts shouting, and a community of people doing this exact work alongside you, so you're not troubleshooting your own nervous system in a vacuum. If today's video is the spark, that toolkit is where the actual rewiring gets built week by week. I think about another client, a founder this time, who came to me not because of one dramatic moment, but because of a slow erosion he couldn't name. He wasn't in crisis. He was simply exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fix, second-guessing decisions he used to make instantly, and increasingly avoiding situations where he might be evaluated. When we mapped out his days, what we found wasn't one big stressor, it was dozens of small spikes, stacked back to back, with no recovery built in between any of them.
He'd go from a tense call straight into a difficult email, straight into a meeting where he felt watched, never once giving his body a chance to come back down before the next spike layered on top of the last one. The 4-minute sequence wasn't a cure for him, it was a circuit breaker, something he started inserting between those stacked moments so his baseline had a chance to actually reset instead of climbing all day every day until it spilled over into the kind of inner monologue that kept him up at night. What both of these stories have in common isn't a specific job or the specific trigger, it's that neither of them needed a personality overhaul. They needed their body to stop running an emergency response to situations that weren't actual emergencies. And they needed a tool simple enough to actually use in the middle of a real day, not just in a quiet meditation room with nowhere to be. Now let's talk about what it looks like to live with a baseline that doesn't require constant firefighting. Start by learning your own early warning signs, the signals that show up before the inner critic ever opens its mouth. For most people, it's a tightening in the jaw or chest, a shortening of the breath, a sudden urge to check a phone. These are the early ripples of a cortisol rise. Catch them at that stage, and you almost never need the full sequence. One deep exhale and a moment of stillness is often enough to stop the spike before it builds. Spend a week simply noticing, without trying to fix anything yet. Where in your body do you feel it first when stress starts to climb? For some people, it's the jaw clenching before they're even aware of a stressful thought. For others, it's a subtle holding of the breath, a shallowness that creeps in without announcement. You can't intervene early on a signal you haven't learned to recognize, so this noticing phase isn't wasted time, it's the foundation everything else gets built on. Next, build a daily floor instead of waiting for a daily fire. Protect 2 or 3 short windows in your day, morning, midday, evening, where you practice that extended exhale breathing, even when you feel completely fine. This isn't about waiting until you're in crisis. It's about keeping your baseline low enough that the demands of a hyper-fast, AI-accelerated world don't have room to put you into the red in the first place. Treat it like brushing your teeth, not a response to a problem, but a habit that prevents one. Consider doing a short weekly check-in with yourself, maybe Sunday evening, where you simply asked, how many times this week did I catch the voice early versus how many times it got loud before I noticed? You're not grading yourself, you're gathering information, the same way you track any other metric you actually wanted to improve. Most people are stunned once they start tracking this to realize how often they're already catching it early without giving themselves any credit for it. I also want you to think about what surrounds those daily windows, because the habit doesn't exist in isolation.
isolation from the rest of your life. If you're protecting 3 minutes of calm breathing in the morning and then immediately opening your phone to a flood of notifications, you're essentially undoing the deposit the moment you make it. The goal isn't to add one more isolated ritual to an otherwise unchanged day. It's to build small buffers around the moments where your baseline is most vulnerable. The first few minutes after waking, the transition between work and home, the last half hour before sleep, so the rest of your day has a stable floor to operate from instead of starting and ending in a reactive state. And give yourself permission for this to be uneven. Some weeks you'll catch the early signals consistently. Other weeks, life will be loud enough that you'll find yourself back in the full 4-minute sequence more often than you'd like. That's not regression. That's simply what it looks like to have a nervous system that responds to a genuinely demanding life. The measure of progress isn't a permanently quiet system. It's a system that recovers faster and a voice that holds less authority over you, even on the weeks when it's louder than usual. Here's what I want you to walk away with today. The version of you underneath that critical voice, calm, capable, clear-headed, isn't something you need to manufacture through years of work. It's the version of you that's already there the moment the chemical noise clears out of the way. You're not building a new personality. You're removing an obstruction. I think about that surgeon again almost a year after we first worked together. She told me the inner critic never fully disappeared, and I want to be honest with you, it likely won't fully disappear for you either because some version of that threat detection system is simply part of being human. What changed wasn't the absence of the voice, it was the relationship to it. It went from being the loudest thing in the room to being one of many voices, one she could acknowledge and then set down. That's a realistic goal, not silence forever, just no longer being run by it. I want you to sit with that for a second because it matters more than it might sound like. So much of what gets sold to people chasing peace of mind promises a finish line, a day when the noise stops completely and stays stopped. I'm not going to promise you that because it wouldn't be true and you deserve better than a comforting lie. What I can promise you is something more durable than a finish line, a skill. The ability to recognize the chemical the moment it starts rising, and the tools to bring yourself back down before it has the chance to write the story of your day, your decision, or your worth. That skill doesn't disappear when life gets hard. If anything, it becomes more valuable exactly then. Hit subscribe if this resonated with you, go grab the self-regulation toolkit linked below, or join the community where we do this work every week. Either way, leave this video and actually run the sequence today the next time that voice shows up, not as an idea you agree with, but as something you've physically done. Because here's the truth I want to leave you with. When you control your biology, you finally own your mind. Not someday, not after years of work, starting with your very next breath. We take the breath so we can grow the life. Now go take yours.